Hey there guys, how's it going? Nordic Warrior here. So, some of you on my Kawasaki video told me that you really enjoyed that style of video, and I actually did get a few requests. One of the requests I got was to do a similar video about Tommy Morrison, so let's talk about it. Now, you guys that have followed my channel will know that when I do these types of videos, I like to break down the careers of certain fighters and talk about how good I think they were, how good they could have been, and how would they have done in today's era or any era besides their own. So Tommy Morrison was a heavyweight champion from the 90s. He briefly won the WBO title and only had one defense, and it was on his second attempt. Now, Tommy Morrison came on the scene around about the late 80s, early 90s, and as usual with heavyweight contenders from America, he gained a huge amount of hype and a huge amount of intrigue from the mainstream boxing media over there. And basically, when he was on his way up, he was seen as one of the most promising heavyweight prospects of his era. And he had a string of victories in the early part of his career, mostly by knockout and mostly against lower level fighters with losing records. The only guys he fought who were really worth talking about were pretty much past their prime, the likes of Pinkland Thomas and James Tills and fighters like that, so really nobody that special. He fought several of the same guys that Mike Tyson fought on his way up, and did almost as good a job. So on his way up, Tommy Morrison was seen as a bit of a wrecking machine. He was known for his devastating knockout power. He had a really powerful left hook that he sort of developed in the amateurs. He was known for knocking out guys who were much older and much bigger than he was. So going into his first title shot against Ray Mercer, he was, I believe, favoured to win the fight. His handlers, his backers thought that he was going to win the fight. And in my personal opinion, looking at that fight in retrospect and how that fight was built and how Tommy Morrison was sort of groomed prior to it, in my opinion, it's a classic example of how not to manage a fighter. He was horribly mismanaged in my opinion, because like I mentioned before, prior to fighting Ray Mercer, Tommy Morrison had really fought nobody. He had never been chin checked, he had never been properly tested as a fighter, so going into that fight, he didn't know what his punch resistance was like. He'd never really had to test his stamina, he'd never really had to prepare for a hard 12 rounds, so going into a title shot was really risky and it didn't pay off. What ended up happening was his lack of preparation and his lack of experience came back to bite him in the ass. He basically went all guns blazing, started beating the crap out of Ray Mercer and trying to force an early knockout. He emptied the tank, he threw everything but the kitchen sink at Ray Mercer and really didn't plan on preparing for a hard 12 rounds or potentially going the distance. And ultimately what happened is Tommy Morrison ran out of gas and got brutally knocked out by Ray Mercer. So yeah, that was a rude awakening for him there, and it really came as a shock to a lot of the people who were hyping him up at the time. Tommy Morrison, of course, went back to the drawing board, had a couple of victories on his way up, had a few impressive knockouts, again at a lower level, but started to gradually increase his opposition a little bit. And then a couple of years later, he fought George Foreman. Now, George Foreman was an old man at that point. He was in his mid-40s, I believe, but even though he was in his mid-40s and even though he was definitely way past his prime, he still had a few attributes to think about. I mean, he still had a very good chin and he still had very good power. He was also taller and had longer arms. He was a much bigger, heavier man than Tommy Morrison, so there was still a few things for Tommy to think about going into that fight. And what you'll notice about that fight is that Tommy Morrison took a very, very different approach. Now, that was his second title shot. Of course, the first one being unsuccessful against Ray Mercer. He got a chance to fight for the vacant title against George Foreman, and he took a much different approach. Like I said, he was a lot more tactful, he was a lot more measured, he had prepared for a hard 12 rounds. He used his jab, he moved when he needed to, he got out of range when he needed to. He took his time, he kept calm, he didn't really go looking for the knockout. He took the approach where he was just going to focus on winning rounds, because he knew that George Foreman had some of the same attributes that Ray Mercer had, like a good chin and a lot of power. So Tommy Morrison boxed very well in that fight. He outboxed George Foreman. He pretty much completely schooled George Foreman, and George Foreman had a couple of moments here and there when Tommy decided to take a couple of rounds off and just bide his time and really figure out what he was doing in there, because Tommy Morrison never really had great stamina. You know, he was never a guy who could really fight for a hard 12 rounds at a fast pace. So there was moments in the fight where he took his foot off the gas, and that kind of gave Big George, who was just such a imposing, like, monolithic figure in the ring, the opportunity to try and get back in the fight a little bit. But Tommy, for the most part, won every round and just boxed very smart and managed to win the world title. So that was a very good performance from him. And to me, the George Foreman fight, and some of you guys might disagree with me, but in my personal opinion, the Tommy Morrison from the George Foreman fight, that was the best version of Tommy Morrison we ever saw. I think that was his best performance. I think he was in the best shape of his career. And to me, I just think that was vintage Tommy Morrison. I think that was him at his prime. I think that was his best performance. Now, unfortunately, as far as Tommy Morrison's career goes, from that point on, that was basically it. Tommy Morrison never really did anything significant from that point on, and it was all disappointments. Now, there was a lot of things going on outside of the ring with Tommy Morrison. You guys that have followed Tommy Morrison's career and have watched some videos on him will know that Tommy Morrison had a very controversial lifestyle. There was a lot of things going on the outside of the ring. Like I said, he had a lot of problems. He fell in with the wrong crowd, and there was drugs involved and alcohol and stuff like that. There was also a lot of controversy surrounding a positive HIV test, which has been disputed ever since. And I don't really want to get into that, but I just figured I'd point it out because it was at this point, after the George Foreman fight, that things really spiraled out of control for Tommy Morrison, because he never really improved from that point on. He had one title defense, and his second title defense, where he lost the title, he got destroyed in one round by Michael Bent, and that was a pretty shocking upset at the time. Michael Bent just blew Tommy Morrison away in the first round, and that was the beginning of the end for Tommy Morrison's career at world level, because it was clear from the way that the Michael Bent fight went. It was very clear that Tommy Morrison no longer had any punch resistance, and he always had stamina issues. We always knew from the Ray Mercer fight that his punch resistance was never great, but at that point it seemed as if his punch resistance was a lot worse, and whether that was to do with his diagnosis or whether it was just to do with his lifestyle, I don't know. Some people speculate that if Tommy Morrison had been a little bit more committed and kept his head on his shoulders, that he would have been a much more successful fighter. That's definitely possible, and it's definitely worth speculating, but I'm not really going to do that here. I'm just going to talk about how I think he would have done in today's era, how I think he would have done in other eras, based on what we know about Tommy Morrison. And after the Michael Bent fight, like I said, we didn't really see anything from Tommy Morrison that was really that impressive. I mean, he had the draw with Ross Purity, and he also got destroyed by Lennox Lewis. I mean, Lennox Lewis completely demolished Tommy Morrison. So, other than the victory over George Foreman, there isn't really much that we can say about Tommy Morrison in terms of world level. How would he have done, in my opinion, in today's era, for example? Looking at Tommy Morrison's style, looking at his attributes, and seeing how they would match up against some of the greats and some of the titleists from more recent eras of boxing. So Tommy Morrison, like I mentioned earlier, he was known for his power. The guy had a tremendous left hook. He was a very, very accurate and powerful puncher with that left hook. He turned it over beautifully. He could throw it to the head and body with equal effect, and that was what he was mostly known for. He had that classic Mike Tyson come forward style, you know, a guy who really relied on his power. He was more of a pressure fighter. He would move his head, had good punching technique, good boxing fundamentals. However, he wasn't really known for his athleticism, and what I mean by that is he didn't have great stamina. Like I mentioned earlier, he wasn't the quickest heavyweight, or he was somewhat quick, but he was never as quick or explosive as somebody like Mike Tyson, for example. Like I said, didn't have the best stamina, didn't have the best punch resistance, just wasn't really much of an athlete to me. He was more of a muscle-bound puncher, if you know what I mean. So when I look at Tommy Morrison and his style, and when you consider the fact that he was about 6'2", if he were around in today's era, compared to some of the top heavyweights right now, like let's say he were to fight Tyson Fury, for example, or let's say he were to fight Anthony Joshua, in my personal opinion, and some of you guys might disagree, I know that Tommy Morrison has a lot of fans, but I don't think he would have much of a chance, if I'm being honest. I think he would get demolished by those guys. In fact, the only chance that I would give somebody like Tommy Morrison, if you look at Tommy Morrison's style against those guys, somebody who's a short pressure fighter with a lot of power who comes forward, the only way a fighter like that could beat somebody like Tyson Fury or Anthony Joshua is if they had two things. In my opinion, you need a good chin and you need good stamina. The reason why Andy Ruiz, for example, who's a modern day heavyweight contender, was able to beat Anthony Joshua and win the title was because Andy Ruiz, despite being shorter, despite not being as powerful as somebody like Anthony Joshua, or even as technically skilled in my opinion, Andy Ruiz had a fantastic chin and he had fantastic stamina. So when he was knocked down by Anthony Joshua and he was hurt quite badly by Anthony Joshua, he was able to recover very quickly and come back and drag Anthony Joshua into his kind of fight and brawl with him and force a stoppage. Tommy Morrison, in my opinion, doesn't have that type of athleticism. He doesn't have that type of durability. He doesn't have that type of chin. If Tommy Morrison were caught with that same punch off Anthony Joshua that Ruiz was, he wouldn't have gotten back up. I think Tommy Morrison's lack of punch resistance and lack of stamina over 12 rounds would have cost him, and I think he would have gotten taken out by Anthony Joshua, in my opinion. Likewise, if he fought Tyson Fury had very good stamina. Tyson Fury has, a lot of reach on somebody like Tommy Morrison. He's just much taller, much more fleet of foot. He moves around the ring very well. He's got a very good jab. Tyson Fury would just box his ears off, in my opinion, and I think he would force a stoppage in the later rounds against somebody like Morrison. So I wouldn't give him a good chance against any of the top two guys at heavyweight right now. If he were to fight somebody like Deontay Wilder, on the other hand, I think that's a good fight. I think that's a great fight. And I think I would give Tommy Morrison a very good chance of beating Wilder, a much better chance. And the reason why I say that is because Deontay Wilder, if you look at the way he fights and his style, Deontay Wilder is so technically limited. Like, Deontay Wilder swings himself off balance. He's got terrible footwork, terrible balance, very inaccurate, doesn't have a jab. He's one-handed, so a pressure fighter like Tommy Morrison would only really have to worry about the straight right hand, which is dangerous and could knock Tommy Morrison out. But I think the likelihood is that Tommy Morrison at his prime, with the attributes that he has, like his left hook and his ability to pressure you coming forward, and let's say it was the Tommy Morrison from the George Foreman fight, I think he would comprehensively outbox Deontay Wilder, who doesn't really have a great chin himself, and like I said, has very poor balance and very poor defense, and throws himself off balance by swinging his punches, and is also one-handed. I think that Tommy Morrison will probably get inside after outboxing Wilder for a few rounds, and I think he could probably knock him out. He could land that big left hook or that big overhand right on the inside, so I think I would favour him over Deontay Wilder. There are other heavyweight contenders and heavyweight champions from more recent eras that I think would be interesting to see him fight. I don't think he would beat the Klitschkos. I think the Klitschkos would absolutely demolish Tommy Morrison. I don't think he has a chance. Again, I reiterate what I said about Anthony Joshua and Fury. I think he would need a very good chin and very good stamina to beat the Klitschkos personally. I think he gets knocked out by either of them. If he were to fight, say, somebody like Povetkin, I would favour Povetkin over him. I think Povetkin would knock him out late. Povetkin has a kind of a similar style to Tommy Morrison, except he has much better footwork. He's a little bit quicker than Tommy Morrison. Povetkin also has much better stamina in his prime. Obviously, Povetkin right now is in his early 40s and is shot to pieces, but despite being shot to bits now, at his prime he had a very good chin and he had very good stamina. So I think that Povetkin would beat Tommy Morrison. I'm trying to think of other contenders from recent years. Even if you look at somebody like another title holder, somebody like Samuel Peter, I would probably favour Samuel Peter over Tommy Morrison, if I'm being honest. Because Samuel Peter, a lot of people forget, that guy was a massive puncher. And not only that, he had a granite chin in his prime. He was very rough, very, very tough. He was a guy who would hit you behind the head, and he was very dirty and would rough you up. And I think he would drag Tommy Morrison into a fight. And I think he would probably do the same thing to Tommy Morrison that he did to Oleg Muskayev. He would kind of just rush him up, rough him up, hit him around the back of the head, and really drag him into a fight and make him brawl and would knock him out. And that was kind of what happened to Tommy Morrison when he fought Ray Mercer. I think the same thing would probably happen to him if he fought Samuel Peter. So that's a fight I don't think he would win personally. And another heavyweight champion from recent years is of course David Haye. That'd be a good fight. Tommy Morrison against David Haye. I don't actually know who I would pick in that one. That's to me is a 50-50 fight. I think stylistically that might actually favour Tommy Morrison, because David Haye never had great stamina himself and didn't have the best punch resistance and would often be very economical with his punches and wouldn't really jab much. So again, that would give a pressure fighter like Tommy Morrison the chance to work away and maybe outbox David Haye with his superior volume and his jab and his movement and stuff like that. And also he could get inside and he would have a good chance at a knockout. He could catch Haye with one of those big left hooks or one of those overhand rights. But at the same time, I also give David Haye the same puncher's chance. David Haye could also knock Tommy Morrison out, because David Haye had much faster hands and he was very explosive and a lot of power and was very accurate. So I give either guy a chance at a knockout there, but I think I give Morrison the slight edge in that fight. It's interesting to see how he would do against those guys, man. I mean, there's so many heavyweight titleists in recent years and in Tommy's era and in other eras that I think would have been interesting to see him fight. But if I'm being perfectly honest, when I look at Tommy Morrison and just view his career and his attributes objectively, I don't think he was that good. I think Tommy Morrison was a fighter who, in my personal opinion, was a very entertaining one. He was a very exciting one, but I don't think that he had the same type of potential or the same type of talent that somebody like Mike Tyson had, for example. Somebody actually said in the comments of that video, the same person who requested that I do this video, claimed that he believes personally that Tommy Morrison might have been able to beat Mike Tyson, that he might have been able to knock him out. I strongly disagree with that. I respect your opinion, but I strongly disagree with that. I think Mike Tyson at his prime would absolutely demolish Tommy Morrison. Now, if it was a faded Mike Tyson, let's say it was prime Tommy Morrison from the George Foreman fight versus Mike Tyson from, say, the Danny Williams fight or the Kevin McBride fight, then yeah, Tommy of course has a chance, because that version of Mike Tyson himself had no punch resistance and didn't really have much stamina. But Tommy Morrison, despite at that stage of his career having more stamina over 12 rounds, he would have still been vulnerable to even that version of Tyson, just based on the difference in hand speed and power. Tyson was incredibly powerful and incredibly explosive, and if I'm being honest, I just think that the likelihood is Mike Tyson would probably knock Tommy Morrison out. If it was a prime Mike Tyson, I think he knocks Tommy Morrison out inside 2 rounds, if I'm being honest. So Tommy Morrison, he was a good fighter. He was a powerful puncher. He had some good abilities and he was exciting, and he had a lot of hype on his way up, and it's easy to see why. He was a very, very easy to look at fighter, if you know what I mean. He had a very aesthetically pleasing style, just like a young Mike Tyson did. But I don't think he was as good as Mike Tyson. I don't think he would have ever beaten any of the elite heavyweights. I think the Klitschko's would ruin him. I think that a lot of the top heavyweight contenders today, I would probably even favour Andy Ruiz over him, just based on styles, just based on the difference in chin and durability. I mean, if he were to fight, I guess if you look at some of the lesser known titleists at heavyweight, like somebody like Trevor Bryan, for example, I'd probably favour Morrison over him. I mean, obviously. I mean, if he were to fight Manwoo Chaw, who was a title holder, I'd probably favour Tommy Morrison over him. I think he could beat those guys. But if we're talking about the top guys at heavyweight, and even somebody who like Povetkin, who was more of a wild card in the Klitschko era, I think somebody like Povetkin beats him. So to me, Tommy Morrison was a good fighter, but he was never an elite heavyweight. He was only a heavyweight titleist briefly, and that was when he fought a old man George Foreman. So to me, he was a fighter who had a lot of flaws, and whether or not he could have developed into a better fighter is all pure, entirely speculation. So I don't know, but we'll see. I mean, Tommy Morrison was definitely a fighter that I think a lot of boxing fans of his era wanted to see do better, because there was something about him. I don't know what it is, there was something about him. Maybe it was his personality, because the guy was also an actor. You know, he was in one of the Rocky movies and did a very good job there, and he was a very charismatic and very likable individual, and I think a lot of people really wanted to see him do well. But I just personally don't think he was that good. I just think he was a solid, powerful, exciting fighter. That's all I really see him as. So yeah, let me know what you guys think anyway. Let me know how you guys think Tommy Morrison would have done against some of the guys I mentioned, or maybe some people I neglected to mention and forgot about while making this video. But yeah, if you guys disagree with me, let me know in the comment section. Let me know what you guys think. Yeah, thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more videos like this. I'm going to be doing videos like this for other fighters too. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching. God bless.